I have hosted a great many dinner parties in my time. 31 years in that house, with its long mahogany table, and the Bosendorfer Grand in the drawing room that I bought on impulse in Vienna and never once played. I am not a musical man. I bought it the way a certain kind of self-made person buys things, because it was the most beautiful object in the room and I could. It sat beneath the south-facing windows for a decade, gathering a fine, even coat of irrelevance, and I thought nothing more of it than I thought of the fireplace surround or the oil paintings my late wife had chosen. It was furniture with ambitions. The woman who cleaned it was named Margaret Okafor. Maggie, she preferred. She had come to me through an agency 3 years prior, precise, quiet, with a manner so efficient and unobtrusive that I sometimes arrived home to find the house entirely transformed, and no evidence she had been there at all, as if the rooms had simply tidied themselves out of courtesy. I knew almost nothing about her. She caught the number 47 bus. She took her tea without milk. She had, I once noticed, a small scar along the inside of her right wrist that she kept covered with her sleeve. I did not ask. She dusted the Bosendorfer every Tuesday without fail. That I did notice, the particular care she took with it. The fallboard always left down, exactly as she found it. The keys wiped with a separate, softer cloth she kept in her coat pocket and brought herself. I found this mildly touching and thought nothing more of it. The evening of the 14th of February, which I mention only because it lends the whole business an unearned sentimentality, I assure you it did not have at the time. I had 12 guests for dinner. It was not a musical crowd. There was a solicitor, 2 couples in property development, my sister and her husband, and a man named Gerald Alderton, who lectured on musical criticism at a college in Bristol, and had written 2 books I had not read and would not. Alderton was the sort of guest who arrives with opinions already polished. By the time the cheese board appeared, he had delivered his verdict on 3 conductors, a recently deceased composer he considered overrated, and the current state of the professional concert circuit in Britain, which he found, in a word, provincial. Maggie was still finishing up in the drawing room when we moved through after dinner. She had misjudged the timing, a rare thing, and was collecting the last of the evening glasses from the side table when we filed in. She glanced up, gave a small nod, reached for her coat. It was Alderton who stopped her. He had a brandy in hand, and that particular brightness in the eye of a man who has found an audience and intends to use it. He gestured toward the Bosendorfer with his glass. "Come on, then," he said. The room was still settling into chairs and conversation. Nobody paid much attention. "Play us something. Just a few notes. Warm the evening up. Simple as you like." He said it the way a man flicks a coin to a child. Not cruel, precisely. Something worse than cruel. He simply could not conceive of any response but the one he expected. A polite refusal, a flustered laugh, a good night, and a quick exit. It was a social curio he'd produced, a light amusement for the tail end of the evening, and the slight chuckle that moved through the room confirmed it. My sister, I noticed, looked briefly at her shoes. Maggie stood still for a moment. Her coat was over her arm. She looked at the piano, not at Alderton. Then she set her coat down on the side table, pulled out the bench, and sat. The chuckle in the room hadn't quite finished dying when she placed her hands over the keys. She did not crash into anything. She did not make a statement. She simply began. The opening of the Chopin Ballade in F minor is deceptive. It begins as a kind of question, a single melodic line, almost without accompaniment, so soft and searching that if you are not paying attention, you might think it is merely something being tuned, or tested, or found. I was not paying attention. I was watching Alderton, who had taken a seat on the arm of the sofa, with the satisfied expression of a magician who has a harmless prank in motion and is waiting to enjoy it. Then he heard what she was playing. It did not happen at once. It happened across 12, perhaps 15 seconds, and I watched it happen the way you watch a man's face when news arrives that he has not yet understood. The smile didn't vanish. It thinned first, then it stilled. By the time the left hand began its slow, searching counterpoint beneath the melody, the brandy glass was resting, forgotten, on his knee. The room found its silence, one person at a time. I could not tell you the exact moment I understood. We were in the presence of something I had no framework for. My knowledge of the piano repertoire is that of a man who has attended the occasional concert and come away with pleasant, vague impressions. I could not have named the piece. I could not have told you what made it technically difficult, or what it cost to sustain those long melodic arcs with the left hand threading its intricate counter-melody beneath. I only knew, somewhere below the level of musical education, that whatever I was hearing was not accidental. She played without looking up. Her posture was not showy. There was nothing theatrical in her manner, no swaying, no exaggerated expression. She sat as she always sat, upright, precise, and if her face held anything, it was a quietness I had not seen in her before, not performance. Something older than performance. The first theme returned, elaborated now, the melody passing between the hands with a fluency that made it seem not like a rehearsed sequence, but like the only natural way the music could move. I am aware, writing this, that I cannot properly convey the sound of it. I could tell you the notes were even and clear, that the phrasing had a particular quality of breath to it. Each phrase allowed to complete itself, before the next began, but that description is a photograph of a sunset. The thing itself was not available to description. You had to be in that room. The property developers had stopped their side conversation. The solicitor had set down his coffee. My sister, across the room, had her hand flat against her collarbone in a gesture I had only seen her make twice before in my life, at occasions of high emotion. Then the second theme arrived. If the opening was a question, this was what the question had been moving toward. A wider, more open melody that seemed to carry, if I can use the word without being absurd about it, a kind of grief that had made its peace with itself, not a grief that wept, one that had lived with the fact of itself for so long that it had become simply part of the landscape. I did not know then why it struck me that way. I know now. She played the development. I will confess I gripped the arm of my chair. The music shifted there into something I had not expected. Variations and elaborations on the opening material that grew technically demanding in a way that revealed, slowly, the true scale of what we were witnessing. Passages where both hands moved across the full span of the keyboard with a precision that should not, by any reasonable assessment, have been possible. She made no face. She drew no attention to the difficulty. The music simply got larger. Gerald Alderton had not moved. His brandy sat untouched, and then she reached the coda. I did not know it was called the coda. I only knew that at a certain point the music gathered itself in a way that felt like a storm gathering rather than a performance building, and what followed was 5 minutes of playing so ferocious and complete that I stopped breathing in the manner of a person watching something fall and unable to look away. Both hands working in opposition, in conflict, in some private argument that had been in progress for the entire length of the piece and had finally come to the point of reckoning. The Bosendorfer, for the first time in its life in my drawing room, was not furniture. It was a thing being asked to give everything it had. When she released the final chord, the silence was not the silence between pieces. It was the silence of a room holding its breath, without knowing it had been holding it. I do not know how long it lasted. Long enough that I became conscious of the fire still going in the grate, and a car passing in the street outside, and the small sound of the roof settling. 14 adults in a drawing room, and not one of us made a sound. Maggie lifted her hands from the keys, set them in her lap, looked at the middle distance. For a moment, the way a person looks when they have been somewhere private and are finding there. Way back, she stood. She picked up her coat from the side table. She said quietly, "Good night," to the room in general, not to anyone. And she walked to the hallway and let herself out of the front door. The number 47 ran until 10:30. I do not know who moved first. I believe it was my sister, who made a small sound that was not quite a word. The room did not break into applause. It came back to itself the way water comes back to still, slowly, without drama. Gerald Alderton stood up. He crossed to the piano bench. He sat down on it. He looked at the keys. He did not touch them. He sat there for a long time. I went to fix myself a drink I didn't want and stood in the kitchen for a while, doing nothing in particular. Later, when everyone else had gone, Alderton stayed. He sat in the chair nearest the Bosendorfer and looked at it the way a man looks at a thing that has revised his understanding of something he thought was settled. Eventually he said, without looking at me, "That was the Chopin F minor ballade." He paused. "The fourth. There are 4, and this is the most difficult by a considerable margin." He paused again. "It is not a piece you can play at that level, without years of serious study. Dedicated study. Under a teacher of real quality." He looked up at me then. "I didn't know," he said. "Neither did I. I rang the agency in the morning. They told me only what I already knew, her name, her address in Thornton Heath, and that she had been with them for 11 years. without a single complaint from any client, which they mentioned with the tone of people announcing a long service award. She came on Tuesday as usual. I asked her, in the kitchen, over her customary tea. I said I hoped it wasn't intrusive. I said I had been thinking about the previous Friday, about the playing, and that if she didn't wish to discuss it, I entirely understood. She looked at her tea for a moment. She had studied in Warsaw, she said, 2 years at a conservatory, then privately under a man whose name I would not have recognized. She had played until she was 34. Her husband had been a pianist too. A better one than her, she said this flatly, as a fact and not a wound, though I suspected it was both. He had died of an illness the year their son turned 4. After that there had been the matter of keeping the two of them housed and fed, and the playing had belonged to a different life, and she had let it go. She had not touched a keyboard in 12 years, she said, before the previous Friday. I sat with that for a long moment. I asked her why she had agreed to play. She considered this. Then she said, I don't know, exactly. He was so certain I couldn't. She said it without heat, a mild observation, a statement of the mechanism. And I was very tired of knowing something that everyone in a room has decided they already know. I have thought about that sentence a great deal in the years since. The rooms we assign people to, the things we decide we already know about a person because of the coat they carry, or the bus they catch, or the cloth in their pocket they bring, themselves. I was not cruel to Maggie Okafor. I was, I think, something worse. I was simply incurious. She moved through my house for 3 years, and I did not think to wonder what she held. The truth came out, in the end, as it always does. Not in words, and not when anyone planned it, but in the only language that carries things too large for ordinary telling. I heard it in 5 minutes of Chopin in a drawing room on a February evening, and I have not forgotten it since. The Bosendorfer still sits beneath the south-facing windows. I dust it myself now with a soft cloth. I leave the fallboard down, exactly as she always did. Maggie no longer works for the agency. I think she plays again. I do not know for certain. I hope she does. Some things you simply have to trust.